I'm so excited to have Debbie McRae back to share part two of the grief processing journey. So I've told a number of people about this. So having this and having you here to answer any questions, if there's questions left over from 2 weeks ago, but also to share more, because I know it's such a meaningful, deep topic. And as you were sharing before, it's what you wish you'd known. So having you share from your journey, but from your professional journey, is really helpful. And I'm grateful you're here. So I'm going to mute and turn it over to you.
Thank you. As a reminder, this is part two of the process of grief that the betrayed partner experiences as they're going through their betrayal trauma. I'm going to do just a very brief overview about what we talked in our previous one. And so that if you haven't had a chance to see it, you can go back. And keep in mind that as we talk about grief, remember there's loss attached to it. And loss comes in so many different ways. As a reminder, we have loss in the trust of our partner, the person that we thought we knew. There's also loss of self-trust. We begin to doubt ourselves. We wonder what's wrong with us. We also have a loss of our sense of self. By that, I mean, who am I? I may question my looks, my intelligence, my intuition. So we begin to have that sense of self that begins to shift and change. We lose trust in others as we're going through the betrayal. We lose that shared past that we thought we had with our partner because it's no longer what we thought we were living. We also have a loss of future, what I anticipated my future to be. And that also gets changed, as well as for those of us who believe in a higher power, we may even feel like we've lost trust in our higher power. So we began to go over the last time we met some of those stages of grief. And I want to remind you a couple of things. I want you to think of this journey of grief. I thought of it like a hike. You know, one year we took a hike on the Nepali coast in Hawaii, and I thought it was a difficult hike at times. Beautiful views at moments when we stopped. And at times we had to kind of figure out where the trail was. Oftentimes we thought we were going in the opposite direction of where the water was. So it twisted and it turned. It was discouraging at times. It seemed impossible. We had to stop along the way. And grief is very similar. It is a process. It is a journey. And oftentimes we can go through these stages of grief, with more than one occurring at a time. So be aware of that. And that grief also has its own schedule. Sometimes we move through some stages fairly quickly, and others, they seem to linger. We've already talked about the shock stage, which I call the fight, flight, or freeze. So I'm in shock about what's going on. Then we go into the denial. I can't believe this is happening to me. We even do denial in comparing ourselves and our trauma to others. Well, at least I don't have it that bad. You know, she's dealing with this, this, and this. You know, my problem isn't nearly as bad as hers. We can go into obsession. So that is that hyper focusing on knowing it all, I call it. Excuse me. And then we go into anger, which is a response to a perceived threat. And oftentimes it is paired with fear. So those are the stages we've already gone over. And today we're going to start with bargaining. And with this one, there's lots of clues along the way to know if you're bargaining. Now, when we think of the loss of a loved one, we think of bargaining in a bit different term. We think of that as oftentimes, please God, if I'm a really, really good person, will you please let my loved one live? Or, if I really do everything just right and I live right, maybe you can help make my partner get better. I guess we could put it in those terms as well with betrayal trauma, but it's a little less cut and dry. I think of this as we go into a couple of patterns of behavior so that I want you to be aware of. One of them is you may have a lot of internal and external dialogue with the words, if only, or what if. So the if onlys cause us to go into finding fault about ourselves. So it's if only I would have noticed the signs sooner, it wouldn't have gotten as bad as it was. If only I will be a really good wife right now, then, if only I'd been a good wife, then maybe he wouldn't have turned to pornography. Or those what if. Well, what if I am really, really nice to him and I ask it really, really nicely? Then maybe he will go to his group consistently. So be aware of that. We can bargain with each other, we can bargain with ourselves. We can also even bargain with the pain we're experiencing. And I think that can occur with the person who says, um, I expect that when I go into group, right, I'm only doing group because I want it to make the pain go away. So if I do group, then that's the other thing I see. If I do this, then this will happen. The problem is oftentimes if we're in the if onlys, we stay in the past. So it's really important. If only I had done this, or what if I had done that? So be aware of that. Sometimes we even bargain and try to figure out using bargaining some really heavy things like, how do I move forward? And sometimes we're constantly bargaining with ourselves. There's a lot of internal dialogue. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be really, really, the perfect wife, the perfect mother. And if I do, then I'm not going to feel as bad as I do. So just be aware of that. It's much more subtle than we think of the bargaining phase or stage in loss. So some of the things that we end up bargaining as well as our personal wellness. We might sacrifice ourselves. We might sacrifice the things that we know we need to do to take care of ourselves. We may also excuse poor behavior. I can bargain my partner's behavior away. I can in my mind go, well, yeah, at least it's not this, or yeah, it's bad. However, it could be worse. That's bargaining. We also begin to accept things that will tear us down. So we've got to be very clear that we are not doing those types of patterns. And I'm going to go through them again to recognize when you're in this phase. You might hear yourself thinking or saying, gosh, if I do this, then he will do that. So I call that the this for that approach. The other thing, the way we bargain is if I explain things to him in the right way, then he's going to understand and he'll want to change. Again, that's bargaining. Or it might be, I go to my partner and I even say, well, what if I do this? Would you do that? Or we go back into the, if I had just said it nicer to him, then maybe he would go to his group like he's supposed to weekly and attend his 12-step group. Another one I hear a lot in group and in my offices is this. If I were more sexy, or if I were skinny enough, if I were more loving, then he wouldn't slip. He would want to be in recovery. So we want to make sure that we don't get stuck here. So be aware that bargaining is a normal part of your healing journey. It's going to happen. We don't want to get stuck there, because if we continually sacrifice ourselves and our integrity, then it prevents us from moving forward. We get stopped in the progress. We end up, we're stopping on that hiking trail and not going any further. Another thing is it may really affect our self-esteem, because we are compromising ourselves oftentimes when we bargain and we get into that dynamic. So be aware, we start to then go into some of that self-deprecating thinking. We don't have compassion with ourselves. It may add to the depression and anxiety that we're dealing with. And it can also cause some emotional and physical pain. I believe that emotional pain, because of the area of the brain that it affects, it actually feels like physical pain in our body as well. So here's what we need to ask ourselves. Here's how we move forward. First of all, ask yourself a few questions. First of all, am I looking to negotiate? If I do this, then he will do that or she will do that. So be aware of that. Now, we can sit down and we can work together and decide what we can both contribute together in our recovery journey. That's a little bit different. Or if I do this, then I will get to here quicker. Be aware of that, the if and then. Be aware of your integrity and ask yourself, am I standing in my integrity, Or am I making a deal with myself or with my betraying partner that after the fact, I feel really bad about the fact that I compromised my values? So I see that show up sometimes, in sexual intimacy. So I am working right now in my group and I'm loving it. We'll talk about this the next time. We're really hitting things like needs and unmet needs and the Bill of Rights and understanding in a relationship. Here are my rights in the relationship. And then we're working on creating boundaries around that. So boundaries are key to stepping out of this bargaining behavior. So, a couple of ways to recognize if you need to set a boundary. First of all, if you're triggered a lot, that indicates you probably have some things that you need to put a boundary around. Whether it's I put a boundary on myself, an internal boundary that keeps my partner safe, or if I need to put that framework, that boundary framework on somebody else to keep me safe. So, be aware of that. Also, if resentment is building, then you're going to need a boundary. There's a boundary that's being violated, or there's a better way to do something so that we can eliminate that resentment. So that's bargaining. Again, it's not really cut and dry. It's just be careful in how you try to assist yourself in your healing process and your partner. Just make sure you're not using bargaining as the main way to do that. The next stage is we're going to put it together. We're going to call this depression/mourning. I'm in mourning. So this is the part of grief that we feel on such a deep level. It's the depressive stage seems to last forever, it feels like. And oftentimes we question whether or not if we are depressed, if maybe we've got a mental illness. And the reality of it is that is a part of the grieving process. However, if you do have any underlying depression, maybe you've battled depression before, then that could have a lot more intensity, and that would be something that you need to have addressed by your mental health provider. So we often look for that when my clients come in, and I often asked if they've had previous depression, because I know depression is going to be part, and that sadness, that mourning part is going to be part of the grieving process. Oftentimes when we're in this, what we see ourselves doing is it feels like life is so overwhelming. We feel like we're living in a fog. I used to describe it like I felt like I am living in a tunnel and I could only see about this much of my life. It was very, very difficult for me to kind of even feel like I was seeing everything, even when I was up moving around. Oftentimes it was hard to get out of bed. And there were times where I had to do it because I had children. I didn't have a choice, but if I could have, I would have just stayed in bed. There are times that you feel hopeless. And it's that point where I would pick up the phone and call somebody who had experienced what I was experiencing so they could give me that hope. They could kind of be that cheerleader that would help me move out of that. Now, I also want you to keep in mind that when we are mourning, that it can also take place at the same time I'm bargaining. It can take place at the same time, right? That I might still be in a little bit of denial. And so I think that's why it makes it so difficult, because this one we feel on such a deep level. So oftentimes, it's advisable to kind of just check in and kind of see if you can identify, okay, which stages of grief am I experiencing in this moment? Because each one has some specific tools that you can use that can assist you in your healing process. Now, notice I said assist you in the process, because it is going to last at its own pace and in its own time frame. Oftentimes, we just want to really hurry through this one because this one is so intense. But unfortunately, it's not possible. And so what we want to make sure is that we are not engaging in the unhealthy behaviors that come along with that natural part of grieving, which is the mourning and the depression. So again, like I've talked about, when we are in this stage, we might cry a lot. We might feel like we're crying buckets of tears and it's never going to stop. We get to that point where we feel like we don't know if we're going to handle the situation. I already mentioned the hopelessness and sometimes that lethargy that comes. It's just hard to move. I used to feel like I was walking through quicksand all day long. Everything felt like it took so much effort. In this particular stage, we want to really work through it fast. This is the one that takes a lot of patience. So you have to have a lot of patience with yourself. You have to recognize that I have to feel this. I have to go through this in order to get through to the other side. So allow yourself to feel the emotions and to feel the pain. Now, this can be really overwhelming, and you may need to go see a qualified counselor who recognizes this type of grief, and they can help you understand it and work through it. Oftentimes having somebody else there to go, oh, that's your grief. Now let's put together how else it's showing up and where are you feeling that in your body? And okay, what are you doing right now to assist with it? And then is there something else we can add to it? Can we take what you're already doing and maybe just tweak it a little bit so that it's a little more effective? Oftentimes just having that person that you can vent to, talk through it, be validated in your feelings and emotions, getting some ideas, and then I love the accountability piece. You go back in and you can talk it through again. So that's very, very helpful. That's one way that you can prevent yourself from getting stuck in your emotions and the pain. So like I said, during this particular stage, as you're experiencing those emotions and those feelings, you've got to examine it, you've got to process it, feel it, and learn from it. And I come back around to this idea pretty much every time we meet, and that is journaling is one of the best ways to do that. You know, it's just a great way to process feelings and what it's tied into and the specifics of what you're grieving. And like I say, get what's going on inside here and here onto paper. And you don't even have to go back and read it if you don't want. I would do a lot of journaling as I was going through my betrayal trauma. And now we're going to talk about acceptance in a minute. Of course, I'm in acceptance, so I can go back and I can recognize, oh, that's what I was going through at that time. And I can see how far I've come. So that's one of the values that I have found in going back and looking at my journals. But remember, in this particular stage, we have to push through the pain in order to heal it. And we as human beings do not like to feel pain. So oftentimes we'll do whatever we can not to experience it. But if we can just remind ourselves that when we get to that part of the journey where it's a really steep climb and we don't think we're going to make it to the top, that we just keep going a little bit at a time. So the next stage we're going to talk about is acceptance. And oftentimes we think of this as the final stage. However, acceptance comes and goes. There are some days we wake up and we go, I can do this, or I can see I'm getting better. And 10 minutes later, we're back in our depression. We're back grieving. We are back bargaining with ourselves. So just recognize that acceptance comes and goes. And over time, acceptance comes and stays longer and longer. Remember that with acceptance, it's not that I am accepting, that my partner had an addiction and it was okay and it's all right. That's not it at all. It is recognizing that this is my new reality. It's being able to look back on my journey, recognizing the growth that I have had. So in our groups, one of the things we do is they have to do a loss timeline and they have to present it to the group. So this begins from the very beginning when you first had discovery or disclosure to present day. Now, we make them do it in the form of artwork because it kind of helps tap into a part of your brain that works so well in processing. And then they present it to the group. So of course, along the way, we're going to be talking about the stages of grief. Right after they do that exercise, they go back and they do kind of that post-growth journey exercise that we call the gratitude timeline. And so they go back and they identify moments in their journey where they saw shifts and changes, they learned things, they saw their own personal growth. I think that's part of the acceptance. And it's that I'm never going to be able to go back to the life that I knew it, but it's okay where I'm at now. I often tell my groups that I'm so grateful I am who I am now because of that journey I went through. Don't want to live it again. Don't want to re-experience it again. Don't want to go through those grieving stages again. However, where I'm at now, I can see that it was so beneficial for my own personal growth. When we are in acceptance, we are living in the here and now. We are not going back to the past, and we are not projecting into the future. We are learning that I can adjust in the moment, and that I have the ability, I have the confidence that I can manage anything that it comes my way, because I may not have to manage it alone. I can turn to my support people. I can turn to family members who are supportive. I can turn to my community to help me in that acceptance. And in that process, we begin to create a new future. Many of my clients will come in and say to me, I didn't really want to come into therapy. I hated the fact that I had to do this because this was not my problem. But right now, I am realizing that everything that I've learned in counseling has become a part of my everyday life. It has literally changed how I look at life, how I look at myself, how I set boundaries, how I do things. And that's the part that I'm really grateful for. So I love the fact that in their process, while they didn't want to do it, they are able to see and accept the fact that in the process, there's some good that comes from it. So when you are in this particular stage and you know that you're working into acceptance more and more, you're beginning to understand more about sex addiction. And I also like that you're looking and understanding sex addiction also in the context of understanding and acknowledging why your partner may have done the things they have done. So I'm able to maybe have a little more compassion in understanding that process. We are accepting at times that, I can no longer trust my partner. Sometimes we have to accept that, and that this again is another journey. And our partners may, in their process, however fast or slow it is, that we're going to be able to sit in it and just go, you know what, I have to accept I can't trust him right now. I have to be okay with that. But in that process, I can start to look for all the indicators that trust is there. I do think that many of my clients, that needing to feel trust right away is something that they all come in with. And it's really hard because remember, they're grieving, they're looking for something to hold on to, and they need to know that they can trust their partner because trust has been so destroyed. And so we are able to kind of come to terms with that and accept what is. In some cases, it means terminating the relationships. I have helped guide women through that process. And that's hard, getting to that place. And sometimes we kind of have to work through some exercises, accepting our realities so that, you can get to that place of acceptance. As my partners, again, I kind of, the pluses and the negatives, we look at the needs that are being met versus those that aren't being met. We look at, positive recovery behavior versus negative recovery behavior. There's all of those things that we look at. And oftentimes acceptance means that this relationship is not going to be able to move forward because there's just not the healing there that is I'm not able to do the healing I need to do. It means that we accept even our own contributions. That was one of the things I had to go do. And that was, I had to talk about, to myself and to my therapist about, what did I do that I needed to do differently that maybe contributed to, my own, might have been my, I'm not good enough thinking. It may have just been the fact that I wanted to maybe sit in my depression a little longer than needed to, or my anxiety, and understanding what that was about. So it's ultimately understanding that, there's things in me that I can change and that I can do differently. Ultimately, acceptance is incorporating what happened in our lives without it defining who we are and without it defining what our life is, which is a really important that right there. Oftentimes, people will start relating who they are to that experience. And so at some point, we want that to be past behind us. We want to be at the top of the mountain looking out at the ocean and seeing the beautiful view. And we don't want to stay stuck in that journey and stuck in the belief that, gosh, I'm a betrayed partner and I'll always be a betrayed partner. So acceptance, again, is really understanding how much you've shifted and how your reality is shifted, and that you are now living in your new reality. And so I'm not sure that we can ever be stuck in acceptance. I think acceptance is a great place to be. I think acceptance, though, we could get stuck if we're not looking at reality, but acceptance, if we're doing it in a healing way, when we get there, we recognize there's no healing, there's no finish line. It's always going to be a continual process. But in that process, we need to be very gentle with ourselves. We can't rush or skip the steps. We need to take things as they come, get the skills, the tools necessary, get that network of support so that when those stages of grief come, then we have the capacity and the ability to deal with it. So even though that trail feels really daunting and it's not one we want to take, we've got to stay on the path. And we have to just allow ourselves the time to get to that place where we recognize we've finally had some growth. And these stages of grief, believe it or not, help us and assist us in that growing process. So that's the end of what I have on grief. I hope that's helpful.
We have some questions, but I also want to go back because I was thinking, when I often hear, and this is extra layers, so someone is a betrayed partner and they're experiencing that, and a family member dies. And so like there's I don't even know what to call it, compounded, grief, and how to not get overwhelmed when there's more going on, like do you perceive that, like, helping identify it, like can you go, okay, I'm in this stage of grief with this loss and this stage of grief with that loss. I hear this often, so I'm not asking, there's often people are struggling with all of these complex things that are truly losses, and then there's the betrayal. So
I have several clients, even just recently, that have had that exact experience. One lost a family member to COVID, and it happened right before we were doing disclosure. I've had one who lost a sibling. And so oftentimes when they come in, we identify and they, where they're at in the grieving and what they're grieving. So sometimes we have to kind of separate it a little bit, just like you said. And so today, what is it that you need to grieve, right? What's coming up as far as that sadness? And what is it that we need to maybe process around that? So you're right, it's very, very complicated. Now, I've even had one client come in and say, I recognize that I compartmentalized or I tucked away, my siblings passing because there was so much grief about this over here in my relationship. And so now I'm ready. I'm in a place now in my healing recovery, in my betrayal recovery, that I need to go back now and address, right, the passing of my sibling. So sometimes it'll present that way as well. You're right, it's very complicated. And sometimes we have to talk through the complicated stuff and figure out, okay, what's going to work for you? I have to kind of look at how the client processes, what their coping skills and tools are, because some people find that certain ones really work for them. And we try to incorporate all that.
And that makes sense. And I can appreciate the compartmental. I can't even deal with that right now. I have to deal with this. So then going, okay, now it's time to pull that one back out as well. So you talked about acceptance and not staying in the relationship. And I so often hear, when you know. And so I was thinking that's that acceptance phase is, because like I've had other partners say too, it's like, like my head knows, but my heart doesn't. And so, like connecting the two and having it be, okay, now I accept that I cannot stay in this relationship, any longer. So that acceptance is really key. I wrote a note, because you said the internal messages about If only. I was thinking that can be an internal message, but it often is compounded by the external message of if only you had, been sexier or done what, I mean, all of those things. And so sometimes it starts on an external and then, um, becomes an internalized message as well. So, helping identify the reality of those, I think is really, critically important. Um, and the whole bargaining, like I thought of a zillion examples with that, but if only you would do, and really believing that if I do all of these things right, then, and it just, that isn't unfortunately how any of this works. So, um, I love that you said if I'm standing in my integrity or compromising, because I do see that often too in a relationship, and particularly addicts can be so manipulative, and so it will be, well, I'm only watching porn. And that's not as bad as if I go hook up with, prostitutes, sex workers. So therefore, and then a partner, feels like, well, okay, that's not as bad. So, therefore, that bargaining. So I think it's sometimes like the bargaining within myself, but it's also, a manipulation and bargaining, externally. So holding the line of integrity, is really important. And you talked about boundaries. If I'm getting triggered, and I thought, if I'm getting triggered by the same thing, that's one thing with a boundary. If I'm getting triggered by lots of things, then how do you navigate setting the proper boundaries so I'm not getting triggered, you know, like the pinball machine.
So let me address that triggered, because one of the things we talked about, I think maybe a month or so back, was I talked about that acronym TEMPO, TEMPO.
Hmm.
And so I oftentimes will use that with my clients. We talk about the trigger, right? The emotions that come up, and we talk about the stories we go into. And we kind of also talk about, okay, what are you seeing your partner doing? What position are they taking? What are the options they moving into? So sometimes we can identify, is that trigger one that it's because of the stories I'm in, my thoughts? Is it actually the behavior that my partner is in? And so, of course, that's going to trigger me, right? Or is it part of either the crisis I'm in, or I'm tapping back into my trauma? So with that, I think each of those we can set boundaries around. If I'm triggered because of the stories I'm telling myself, then one of the things we kind of work with, in addition to working through the trauma, is getting out of the stories and figuring out whether I go into self-compassion or whether I go call somebody and I talk to it. My groups are very close to each other. They Marco Polo, they text each other. So when this comes up, they turn to their group, and their group helps them kind of reframe it, because oftentimes in the moment we can't. And they just calm down, and all of a sudden they realize, okay, I need to put a boundary around what I'm thinking, what I'm telling myself, because that created that trigger. If it's something I'm seeing my partner do, let's say my partner is doing behavior that is not safe for me and it's triggering, then I need to put a boundary around that. If it is I'm in crisis or I'm in trauma, the boundary around that is I've got to stop and go do self-care, recognize that it's my betrayal trauma that's getting activated, or my crisis is getting activated, and that I may need to step out of the situation for a moment and go take care of myself. So again, we do the 3 pillars, which is healthy human contact. We talk about mindfulness, getting back into my body in the moment. And then we talk about just that self-awareness, knowing what I need and then following through on that. So that's kind of how I would see, being triggered. There's always a way we can put a boundary in place there.
So one more thing before we get to the questions, because you talked about the loss timeline, and I have a vision for this. I would love to have you do do a webinar on that at some point. But what I hear you saying is you do a timeline across the losses, and then you go back and you look at the same timeline, but with the gratitude interspersed of, like, yes, this was painful, but there was this person here that really supported me with this. Yes, this was painful, but gosh, the inner strength that I've learned, the resiliency that I've learned, is that fairly accurate for what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It
Yeah.
is. It is. And that's what, and even when I work with my group, we're going to go kind of deep into the stages of grief, right? So that they kind of understand that in conjunction with their loss, and then being able to identify, just like you said, in each of these experiences, and even in between these experiences, are there things that I realize were good, that I can be grateful for, that helped me in my recovery? Because we really want to focus on our post, right, discovery, disclosure, our healing. We want to be able to see how far we've come. Oftentimes in session with clients, I will say to them, do you realize how far you've come? When you first came in, this is what I saw, and here's what I heard you saying. And today you came in and this is how you looked, and this is what you said. And they'll just go, oh my gosh, you're right. I have come a long ways. And I think that's part of the healing process that we need to include. And that is recognizing just how strong we are. Because I think every betrayed partner, it's difficult. And I think very, very strong, powerful women experience this. Even though they may feel powerless in the moment and they may feel like it's hopeless, in reality, they are some of the bravest, strongest women I've ever met.
Yeah, I often share, I sub in occasionally on the betrayed partner groups, and I see amazing, resilient people, in the group, because, they are choosing to stay in the relationship, and not, and they don't have to. I mean, I'm not, there's no judgment, but for the people that are there, they're spending time, supporting each other and getting support from themselves, and it's nothing that anybody ever asked for. This is not, when I got into this relationship, I thought this is how it's going to be. So for them to step into that space, I see as a strong, resilient people, and wanting to learn and grow. So, okay. We could talk forever, but so the first question, how do I come to terms with the fact that staying with my partner means giving up on my lifetime dream of having a faithful partner? Am I shortchanging myself by staying with someone who has already cheated on me, even though I clearly see how much he has changed his life and is dedicated to recovery? It's been 18 months and I still struggling over the perceived cost of this choice. I feel like my dreams for perfection are not working in my favor, but I just can't seem to accept settling. I feel like I'm compromising my values for staying, yet I don't feel I want to or should leave.
Well, first of all, that's a difficult position to be in. And I do hear that, because again, it goes back to that loss of, here's what I wanted. Here's how I perceived my life being and how my life turning out, and it's not turning out like that. And so this is going to be one you're going to have to work through with your therapist who understands betrayal trauma, because there is that place of, I've got to kind of let go of the picture that I had in my mind of how life is going to turn out. But there's multiple layers to this. It's much easier said than done. And the fact is that in your case, your partner's 18 months into recovery, I believe 3 to 5 years. And throughout that process, you're constantly looking to see, is my partner being faithful in his healing recovery, in his behaviors with me, in his behavior with life in general, right? And so I've got to start focusing on some of that faithful part. That's what I would encourage my clients to do, but without, compromising the willingness to look at reality, because we do have to look at the fact that sometimes recovery isn't perfect, but that's usually the more little things. It's not the big things. So we want to see them doing the really important parts of recovery. the dreams of a perfect life and that dreams of perfection, that was hard. I had to come to terms with that. By the world's perception, I had the perfect family. And now my perfect life wasn't going to turn out perfect. And so in those cases, I think we have to get to a place where we can kind of put a boundary around what we're telling ourselves. That's the only way that we can get out of it. First of all, work on the underlying betrayal trauma. If you don't work on that betrayal trauma, then all the thinking in the world is not going to take you out of possibly when you get activated, when you go into realizing that I wanted to have a lifetime with a faithful partner. I had dreams of perfection, right? I'm not going to be able to get out of my thinking on that if I'm so deep in my trauma response. So making sure you're working on that would be very, very helpful. And also then working on, I would make a list. I tell my clients, get your journal out and let's make a list. Let's kind of reframe this dreams for a perfect life or having a faithful partner. Can we shift it? And that's kind of what I was doing earlier on in this answer was, okay, can we look at it on the terms of faithfulness now moving forward? Because it may not be over the lifetime of your relationship. Now, regarding, are you compromising your values for staying? It all depends. I mean, we all have different circumstances. I tell my clients, the reasons for staying are so unique to each individual. And oftentimes I stay because I've got children. I stay because I've got all these memories with you. I stay because I have hope for a better future. I stay because even financially, it would be a hardship to step out of the relationship. So we have to kind of go to those really difficult areas and look at them and go, okay, is that the reason for staying? And if you are staying, are you settling? Are you compromising your values? Are you going against, some really core values that you have that you just can't go against? So we have to work through that. And again, it goes back to, gosh, can we somehow get back to a place where there's integrity and trust and faith, in my partner, and there's consistency and they've got healthy boundaries. And I see this for as long of the amount of time as I need, right, to recognize that finally my partner, my betraying partner, is in a place where they're actually in recovery and it's not, chances of it happening again are slim. I wish it was an easy answer. It's not. But I just want to, I want to validate the fact that you're staying and that you're asking these questions, because these are really important questions to ask and to even struggle over. And so if you're still caught in that struggle, I recommend get in to see your therapist a little more while you're working through the struggle, maybe do some trauma work. So hopefully that's helpful.
I'm so glad you, you shared that you struggle with the dreams of perfection. I don't. In recovery, it's been progress rather than perfection. So that's one of those, like, I was like, oh, wow, that's that's an unsurmountable, you can't get to, no one is perfect, and there's the illusions. And you kind of said that too. It's like from the outside, our family looked perfect, and so I call it the Facebook, everything looks perfect on Facebook and everybody else's families are perfect. And it's just an illusion. So, but what I really appreciate is this person is 18 months, and and is really working on being different, and to me, having someone who is dedicated to being honest and to being real, versus the facade of the Facebook life, would be of value to me. So, but yeah, everybody gets to choose. I hear where you are in the struggle. I'm so glad you're here. And yeah, grieving the loss of, I'm going to have a perfect life,
Yeah, let me circle around really quick on the perfection part, because I've worked a lot on that. Believe me, that has been, I can really relate to the question. And that is, I had to really process perfection, because it wasn't just in my relationship. It was throughout my whole life. It was a pattern that I had learned to do to protect myself, from the time I was very young. And so oftentimes we have to look at that and learn, instead of things being so black and white, it's got to turn out a certain way. I had to really learn to kind of be able to step in the gray, and to also know that if it doesn't turn out the way I think it should, that I can make the adjustment without compromising my integrity and my values. So hopefully that's helpful as well.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking, it's like I have no control over, like, I hate that too, by the way. But it's one of those, I have no control. So like I could plan a perfect life, and, then reality is going to bump into that really, really fast, Yeah. Yeah. So, anyway, but I'm really glad you're here. Okay. Here's the next question. Do you stop grieving the loss of all the years in life that you could have ever had? Um, I can imagine getting better, understanding his addiction, but cannot imagine that the grief of all the loss will disappear. I think what you were sharing earlier about the timeline and the gratitudes would be a huge opportunity for that. But please share.
Well, I'm proof that yes, the grieving and the loss it does go away, or I should say lessen, to where very seldom happens. Now, the reality of it is that there are times in my life, usually around certain events, whether it's with children or holidays, that it'll just kind of show itself a little bit, and I'll go, okay, there it is. It's okay that I feel this way. I wish that da 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 da. However, this is my reality, and this is the good part of my reality. I go to gratitude, right?
Mm.
And it'll go away. I know what it feels like, that this grieving, all the lost years and the life that you could have ever had. Yeah, sometimes I go into that thinking even now, and I just recognize when I'm in it. I tell myself to stop it. I use my thought stopping. I kind of look at the facts. The fact is that, it is what it is. I hate that saying, but I use it. And so, what is it right now? So, is it that, yes, my life is not what I thought it was? It'll never be what I thought it was. But can I, in this relationship, can we create a better, healthier relationship? A lot of my clients will say, if we hadn't gone through this, we wouldn't be where we're at today. We are finally in a place where we can get down into the hard stuff, show up authentically. I mean, work together. We understand boundaries. I mean, they have taken, a really difficult, awful, icky situation. And again, it kind of goes back to their post growth is, we can see that out of this bad rises the good. And so I just want to give you some hope that you are going to end up feeling that the grief is no longer an everyday companion. And in fact, I tell my groups this, that where I'm at now in my recovery, when I think back to the past, it doesn't take me into the pain. I don't feel the pain, the grief, the denial, the shock at that same level. It's very neutral for me. I can stay very grounded. I can stay very calm, but I did my work. And that's the key right there. Just keep going, keep doing. I promise you, if you're doing that, you're not going to be where you're at today, and you're going to get through this, and you're going to feel better.
So the next question, where do therapists and psychologists get a number of months to work on recovery for partners? Everyone is different. Every situation is different. I may have misheard what you said. I thought I heard 18 months.
The 18 months I was referring to, what that question, she had mentioned her husband was 18 months into his recovery, and she was seeing that, he had been doing everything he was supposed to do. I wish we could give you a number. It's so interesting. People will present for the first time in my office in a variety of different ways. I have some who are it's so fresh and new, they're in crisis. And so I may spend 3, 6, months, longer even, getting them out of crisis and stabilized. That's my number one job as a therapist, is to teach them the skills, the tools, help them understand what's going on so that we can lessen the fear, educate them on addiction, educate them on betrayal trauma, that what they're experiencing is a part of that, so they don't feel like there's something just terribly wrong with them. then because we have a specific program where I work, then we put them into kind of a group, and we put them into an education, some classes at first where they understand betrayal trauma. They're working through workbooks, and then they join a group, a healing group. And then that healing group lasts anywhere from 12 to 18 months. And in that, we are processing, we're going deeper, we are taking and really integrating concepts. They're working together as a group, they're processing outside a group and in group. And so I can see some people, depending on what their betrayal is, they might move through it. It could be 18 months. It could be 3, 4, 5 years. It really could, depending. Now, one of the things after we've worked on the crisis, after we worked on the betrayal trauma, I do have some clients who have additional trauma. And that additional trauma kind of makes it a little more complicated. And so once we get them through the betrayal part, and that they're grounded in that, and they're on their way to recovery, then we go and we address the other. So I'm going to say anywhere from, what I am seeing, and this is, everybody's different, right? Every person's different. I would say minimum, really minimum 1 year. But that is, if they're not in our program, I make sure they're in another program. I make sure they're dropping into Rob's groups, into the Prodependence groups. I'm setting them up with extra support. I'm making sure that they're attending other support groups, and then others I've had for 4 or 5 years. So everybody's so different.
And I want to be encouraging on that, because it's not that you're like in the heart of things, for the entire 4 years. There really is an ebb and flow to all of this, and so I also hike, and I hiked out of the Grand Canyon one time, and I stopped and took a picture of the path, and it was hard because you're coming up, but the vista was amazing. And I had so much gratitude. So I was thinking of the timeline of, like in my timeline, it would be, and here was a little easier, and then this, and then this. And, it was all of that, but gratitude for the vista and the companions along the way. There was a little group of us doing that, and other people on the trail. So like I really have used that as my analogy for my recovery journey, because there were peaks and valleys and twisties and rockies, but always support. I was never alone, and and it was so worth the journey to do that. So don't think that, oh my gosh, I have to, 5 years, I would be, it will ebb and flow. There is support, the healing. And to your point too about couples, like the couples that have really done this, the relationship is so much deeper than they ever had before, that they could have ever gotten to. So it was worth the garbage to go through. Not that anybody wanted it,
Yeah.
to get there. So
I appreciate what you said, Tammy, because a lot of times, right, my number one goal, like I told you, is getting them stabilized out of crisis. And often I'll hear my clients say, I feel so much better. I'm starting to feel so much better. And I see, especially in the betrayed partners, they are ready to heal. They want help. They're in it all the way. They come to me that way. And so I see them getting to a place of stabilization pretty quick if they're doing everything, that they're taught to do. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah. I just want them to have hope too. Okay. So this person says, I'm 15 months. I am struggling with triggers and allowing me to get out of character. I go back to before recovery stage and react off from my trauma. I feel bad afterwards, but I justify it because he hurt me for our entire marriage. How can I empathize with him and not attack? That's a great question.
It is a great question, and it comes up in my group, a form of that. That is a dynamic that I see. First of all, I want you to know that I hear very often that I want to attack my partner because I want him to feel as bad as I do. Right? I'm in so much pain right now. I want you to hurt as much as I'm hurting. And so oftentimes partners will, they'll get triggered easily by going back, before recovery, and thinking about things that happened before, and I'll go into their safety seeking. So check in and see when you're in this dynamic, because I'm always looking with my clients, I'm looking for a pattern. What's the pattern here? What's going on here? So I go back, I'm reacting off of either my betrayal, the trauma from my betrayal, because I'm going back to the moment I found out, the moment I discovered, whatever it is. And it's really difficult. You can't have empathy, because when I'm in attack mode, remember, I am not in the front part of my brain. I am not in the prefrontal cortex. I am limbic. So the number one thing to do for you would be recognizing when you're triggered, the minute you start to feel yourself get triggered. So I tell my clients, a trigger you feel in your body because there's an emotion attached to it. I have a feeling about it. So know, is it anger? Is it fear? Is it deep sadness? And recognize, here's where I feel that in my body. So the minute that's starting to come on, right, I know that I'm now becoming limbic. So I'm in fight, flight, or freeze. So that's when you want to attack, because your system believes you're under threat. And even our thoughts can take us there. So I can think about something and it'll trigger me. So in that moment, you've got to stop and step back and take good care of yourself, because the only time you can empathize with your partner is when you're connected to the front part of your brain. And then I'm hoping that you're in recovery. I'm hoping that you're working through the processes that a betrayed partner needs to work through, because it is a journey. And to be able to have empathy for the betraying partner, it takes a while. Again, it's a process. And I don't want you to think that you have to be there, quickly and right away.
So the next question, my husband was knocked out multiple times by father from the age of 6 through 18. Mother did nothing about it. Dad showed him Penthouse magazines starting at age 5. He couldn't stop looking at them once introduced, because that was his only escape from the abuse. He then turned into a sex addict, brought it into our marriage, paid for it, blah, blah, blah. Some not paid for. He's 55, and I just discovered all this. He has done a full disclosure and put accountability software on iPhone and laptop. He has not fought me on any of it. He truly has been amazing in his recovery. I guess that's just a comment. Oh, no. And I'm sorry, I needed to scroll. So that being said, my husband being accountable, my recovery has been so much quicker because of him showing accountability my way, taking complete responsibility for what pain he has caused me. I'm sure that if he would have been like many men I hear about who don't show accountability and don't show that they're stepping out, that it would not be as far into my recovery. So thoughts on that?
I am so happy to hear that you are where you're at. That's proof that it shows you, right? If we can get a betraying partner and a betrayed partner to work together in their recovery and do their work, that it is so stabilizing. Remember, the reason it is because we all need healthy human connection, and it's got to be healthy so that we can regulate emotionally and we feel better. And the fact that your husband is doing everything he's supposed to do, taking accountability in all those different ways, through disclosure, through putting software on his phone, his laptop. I'm assuming he's probably having in therapy. He's recognizing what led him into his addiction and providing that for you. Then it's great to hear that, because oftentimes, and most times, addiction, a lot of times, there's trauma at the root of that. And to be able to look at that betraying partner through those lenses, it's very, very helpful.
And one more, and how long did it take you to get there? And I think of what you started with at the very beginning of, like, these are the things I wish I had learned. So, I suspect that you were in the time frame of the up to 5 years to really process through, but you can share what you wish to share.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned, I think, one of the first times we met, and that was that back when I went through it about 20 years ago, there were no programs like this. And in fact, I had a lot of comments, even from a therapist who just said, well, what are you doing? You're contributing to this. And anyway, I kind of fought my way through and found people that implemented so many of the things that we're doing now. And so I got deep and I did my own work. And it was a good, really 3 hard years of doing work. I'm not going to lie, it was. And then I found that then after that, that was the year of acceptance and letting go. And for me, a process of forgiveness, which was really letting go. And then every year it just got better and better and better. So I believe that it does take about 3 to 5 years to kind of get to a place where you go, okay, this is my new normal. I'm going to be okay. And I know it feels like forever when you hear that. That is so discouraging. But remember, the intensity of the pain you feel is not going to remain the same, that it comes and it goes. And oftentimes you're going to wake up one day and notice, oh my gosh, I had a really good day. I didn't have any kind of a trauma response, or I wasn't sad today. And so start looking and focusing on those and just notice.
Yeah, I love that. And just notice, and the gratitude is really key. It's like there's always people to help. There's always support. There's light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, there's so many different ways to get support. But
Yeah.
and the reality of, like, you talked about when you're in the depressive stage, you're in the depressive stage. It is like going through quicksand. So,
Mhm.
but it isn't always quicksand, and somebody's got a rope. We're pulling you out. So
Yeah. And next time I'm gonna kind of start taking you guys through the needs and the wants and some of the stuff I'm doing with that and the Bill of
great.
Rights. So it really will help you understand, what can I, as a partner, what is my right to ask for? What do I have a right to a need to have met? And what are my rights regarding my boundaries? I think that will help you navigate some of these questions that you've had today as well.
I think so too. I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, and Matt will be here next week, Matt and Scott. So join then, but lots of great things on sexandrelationshiphealing.com between now and then. So thank you as always, Debbie. This was great. So, all
Okay.
right.
Care.
Bye, everybody.